The city below was a sprawling carpet of twinkling lights, but inside the penthouse office, the only glow came from a single desk lamp. Ernesto, a man whose very name made powerful people nervous, sat behind a mountain of paperwork. His suit jacket was draped over his chair, his tie was loose, and the top button of his shirt was undone. This was his kingdom, a world of silent threats and sharp decisions, and he ruled it alone. Helen moved through the shadows of the large room like a quiet breeze. As his personal assistant, her job was to be invisible yet indispensable. She collected an empty coffee cup, the faint clink of porcelain the only sound she made. She was the only one in his entire organization who didn't flinch when his deep voice cut through the silence. She saw the man buried under the weight of his crown, the tiredness in his eyes that he showed to no one else. "You should go home, Helen," Ernesto said without looking up, his voice a low rumble. "It's late." "Just let me finish organizing these files for tomorrow, sir," she replied softly, her voice a calm contrast to the tension that always clung to him. "Then I'll go." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of trust he granted to no one else. As she turned to place the cup on a side cart, the quiet was shattered. The main office door burst open with a deafening crack, splintering the wood around the lock. 3 men, their faces hard and covered with black masks, stormed inside. They moved with a dangerous purpose, their eyes immediately locking onto Ernesto. Ernesto was on his feet in an instant, his body coiled like a spring. But he was a king, not a soldier caught in a surprise attack. His hand flew to his desk drawer, where he kept a weapon, but he was too slow. One of the men was already pointing a gun directly at his chest. "The wolf sends his regards," the lead man sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. Time seemed to freeze. Ernesto's mind raced, calculating odds and finding none in his favor. This was it. This was how it ended, not in a grand battle, but in a silent, stolen moment in his own office. But he had forgotten the quiet breeze. Helen's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Fear turned her blood to ice. But seeing that gun pointed at Ernesto, at the man who, despite his gruffness, had always treated her with a strange, unspoken respect, sparked something else inside her, a fierce, protective fire. Her eyes darted around, searching for anything, any possible distraction. They landed on the small, heavy crystal paperweight on the side cart, right next to the coffee cup she had just put down. It was solid, dense, and perfectly shaped for a throw. In one fluid motion, born of pure adrenaline, she snatched the paperweight. She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. With all her strength, she hurled it not at the man, but at the large, elegant glass window that separated the office from the secretary's area. The sound was explosive. A web of cracks radiated from the point of impact, and the window shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces, raining down like dangerous diamonds. The noise was unimaginably loud in the quiet office, a shocking, high-pitched crash that made everyone jump. The gunman flinched, his aim faltering for just a split second. His head instinctively turned towards the source of the terrifying sound. That 1 second was all Ernesto needed. He was a predator, and the distraction was his opening. He moved with a speed that was shocking for a man of his size. He slammed the man's gun hand against the edge of his solid oak desk. The weapon clattered to the floor. A sharp, brutal punch to the man's jaw sent him stumbling back into his companions, creating a tangle of confusion. The spell was broken. The other 2 men recovered, but Ernesto was already on them. The fight was short, brutal, and efficient. He moved with a controlled fury, every movement designed to disable. In less than a minute, all 3 men were on the ground, unconscious or groaning in pain. Silence descended once more, broken only by the ragged sound of Ernesto's breathing and the faint tinkle of glass still falling from the broken window. He stood amidst the wreckage of the fight, his knuckles bleeding, his chest heaving. His eyes, dark and intense, swept the room and finally landed on Helen. She was still standing by the cart, her hand pressed to her mouth. She was trembling from head to toe, her whole body shaking with the aftershock of what she had just done. Tiny shards of glass glittered in her hair and on her shoulders like deadly confetti. Ernesto walked towards her, his steps slow and deliberate on the glass-strewn floor. He didn't look at the defeated men. His entire world had narrowed to this one woman, this quiet assistant who had just thrown a stone into the gears of his fate. He stopped right in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the sharp, metallic tang of adrenaline. He was so much taller, so much more powerful up close. Very slowly he reached out. His fingers, still smeared with a trace of blood from his knuckles, were surprisingly gentle as they brushed a piece of glass from her hair. The touch was electric, sending a jolt through both of them. His dark eyes searched hers, looking past the fear, looking for the source of that incredible courage. "Helen," he said, her name a low, rough whisper that seemed to vibrate in the air between them. It was the first time he had ever said her name without a title, without a command. It was just her name, filled with a new, profound meaning. He looked from her wide, frightened eyes down to the dangerous glitter on her clothes. His gaze was hot, intense, and full of a storm of emotions she couldn't name. "You're covered in glass," he murmured, his voice dropping to a deep, husky tone that was both a statement and a promise. The air crackled with a new, different kind of danger. It was no longer about guns and enemies. It was about the undeniable, powerful thing that had just been born in the space between them, forged in shattered glass and a single life-saving moment. The cliffhanger was not about the attack, but about what would happen next, in that quiet, charged space, with just the two of them alone. The grand house was never truly silent. It creaked and settled like a living beast, its shadows holding secrets Helen was only just beginning to understand. Since the night in the office, a week had passed. The broken window had been replaced, the splintered door repaired. But the invisible crack that had formed in the wall between her world and Ernesto's remained, wider and more profound than ever. He had not spoken of the incident, but his eyes followed her now with a new, burning intensity. Tonight, a storm raged outside, rain lashing against the windows like handfuls of thrown pebbles. Helen, unable to sleep, was in the kitchen, warming a cup of milk. The sharp cry of the wind masked other sounds, but it couldn't disguise the heavy, uneven thud that came from the front foyer. It was the sound of something or someone hitting the floor. Her heart leaped into her throat. Setting her cup down with a quiet clink, she moved toward the sound, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. The foyer was vast and dark, illuminated only by a single low-wattage sconce. And there, in a pool of shadow and rainwater, was Ernesto. He was on one knee, his broad shoulders slumped, one hand braced against the floor while the other was clamped tightly against his side. His usually impeccable black coat was soaked through, clinging to his frame, and his breathing was a ragged, painful sound that tore through the quiet house. The air carried the sharp, coppery scent of blood, a smell that made her stomach clench. "Ernesto," she whispered, her voice trembling as she rushed to his side. His head snapped up at the sound of her voice. His face was pale, beaded with a mixture of rain and cold sweat, his hair plastered to his forehead. But his eyes, they were the same dark, fierce eyes from the office, blazing with pain and a stubborn will to survive. In their depths, she saw a terrifying vulnerability he would show to no one else. "Helen," he gritted out, her name a strained breath. He tried to push himself up, but a fresh wave of agony made him gasp, his arm buckling. "Don't move. You're hurt," she said, her instincts taking over. She slid her shoulder under his good arm, ignoring the cold wetness of his coat seeping into her nightdress. He was impossibly heavy, a dead weight of solid muscle and pain. "Listen to me," he rasped, his mouth close to her ear, his hot breath fanning her skin. "No doctors. No hospital. Do you understand? No one can know." The command was absolute, leaving no room for argument. He was placing his life, his entire dangerous world, in her hands alone. The trust was as terrifying as the wound. "I understand," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. With a grunt of immense effort, he used her as a crutch, forcing himself to his feet. Leaning on her heavily, they began a slow, agonizing journey up the grand staircase. Every step was a monumental struggle. She could feel the tight clench of his jaw against her temple, hear the suppressed groans he refused to release. His entire body was a rigid line of torment. Finally, they stumbled into his private bedroom. It was a stark, masculine space, all dark woods and deep gray linens, smelling faintly of sandalwood and now of blood and rain. He collapsed onto the edge of the large bed, his strength finally spent. For a moment, he just sat there, head bowed, breathing heavily. Then, with a grimace, he slowly, painfully, shrugged off his soaked coat and let it fall to the floor with a wet slap. His white shirt beneath was torn and stained a dark, frightening crimson on his left side. His eyes, dark and desperate, found hers again. "I need your help," he said, his voice low and rough with strain. "Don't ask questions." This was the inciting incident, the moment the last of the professional walls crumbled into dust. He wasn't her powerful boss giving an order. He was a man, wounded and trusting only her. He began to unbutton his shirt with fumbling, blood-slicked fingers. Seeing his struggle, Helen stepped forward. "Let me," she whispered. Her own fingers trembled as she reached for the first button. This was an intimacy far beyond anything she had ever known. The room was silent except for the drumming rain and their ragged breathing. She worked her way down, each button revealing more of his powerful chest, until the shirt fell open. And there it was. A deep, angry gash, about 4 inches long, just above his hip. It was still oozing blood, a stark, violent contrast against his pale skin. A soft gasp escaped her lips before she could stop it. Ernesto's hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around her wrist. His grip wasn't harsh, but it was firm, grounding. His skin was feverishly hot. "Look at me," he commanded softly. She dragged her gaze from the terrible wound to his face. His eyes held hers, a storm of pain and something else, something raw and pleading. "I need to make love," he whispered, the words husky and filled with a meaning that went straight to her core. "Don't move or it'll hurt more." The words weren't a command, nor were they a threat. They were a confession. He wasn't asking for passion in that moment, he was begging for an anchor. He was asking her to tether his mind to her, to pull his consciousness away from the searing fire in his side and into the warmth of her presence. It was a desperate plea for a connection so deep and physical that it would eclipse the pain. In that charged, silent understanding, everything changed. The air grew thick and heavy, humming with a new, dangerous energy. The simple relationship of boss and assistant was gone, shattered and washed away by the storm and the blood. What remained in its place was something fragile, powerful, and utterly new, a quiet, powerful romance born in the dark, waiting to be sealed not with a kiss, but with a tender touch and a shared breath. The cliffhanger was no longer about his survival, but about the profound, intimate frontier they were about to cross, together. The change in the house was as subtle and profound as the change in the man who owned it. The grand, echoing halls no longer felt like a gilded cage but like a home slowly learning to breathe. The cold, imposing marble seemed to soak up the newfound warmth, reflecting not just light, but a feeling of peace that had been foreign to its walls. This transformation had a single beautiful source, the love that had quietly blossomed between the Mafia king and his maid. In the days and weeks that followed the intense, life-altering night of Ernesto's injury, a new rhythm established itself. Ernesto's fierce, commanding presence was no longer something to be feared, but something that sought her out. He was no longer a distant storm cloud, but the sun, and Helen was his constant, warming orbit. He would find her in the library, dusting shelves that were already pristine. As he passed, his hand would not just brush the small of her back. It would settle there, a firm, possessive heat that seeped through the fabric of her simple dress, making her heart stutter. It was a silent message, a constant reminder of the intimacy they now shared. He would look up from his desk, his brow furrowed in concentration over some business matter, and his eyes would find hers across the room. The stern lines of his face would soften, and a slow, secret smile would touch his lips, meant for her and her alone. It was a smile that promised, that remembered, that adored. Their world became a delicious secret, a treasure they guarded fiercely. A kiss stolen in the butler's pantry, swift and deep, his body caging her against the shelves filled with jars of preserves, the taste of him both familiar and thrillingly new. His fingers would lace with hers under the vast, formal dining table as they ate a meal prepared by a cook who saw nothing, a hidden connection that sent currents of electricity up her arm. At night, he would come to her room, or she to his, and he would hold her, not with the desperate need of a wounded man, but with the reverent possession of a man who had found his sanctuary. He would whisper her name into the skin of her neck, Helen, and it was no longer a plea, but a vow, a prayer of gratitude whispered in the dark. The big, cold house was now filled with this quiet, radiant energy. Ernesto knew, with a certainty that had settled deep into his bones, that this woman had done the impossible. She had not just saved his life or stitched his wound, she had walked into the darkest corners of his soul, the lonely, scarred places he kept hidden from the world, and with her gentle courage and unwavering compassion, she had healed him. She had loved the monster and found the man. One brilliantly sunny afternoon, when the light was golden and the air was sweet with the scent of blooming roses from the garden, he sought her out. He found her not working, but simply sitting on a window seat, a book forgotten in her lap as she watched the world outside. The sight of her, so peaceful and beautiful, filled him with a determination so fierce it stole his breath. "Come with me," he said, his voice a low, intimate rumble. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, and led her not to his study or the sitting room, but through a set of French doors she had always assumed were locked. They stepped into his most private sanctuary, a walled garden hidden from the rest of the world. It was an explosion of color and life. Bees hummed a lazy song as they danced from flower to flower, and climbing vines heavy with jasmine filled the air with an intoxicating perfume. It was a world away from the grit and violence of his empire, a secret paradise. He led her to the very center, where an ancient, gnarled olive tree provided a canopy of dappled shade. Here, surrounded by vibrant life and breathtaking beauty, the last shadows of his dangerous world seemed to melt away. He turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. His grasp was firm, warm, and sure. His thumbs gently stroked the backs of her hands, a touch that was now as familiar to her as her own heartbeat, yet in this moment, felt entirely new and significant. "Helen," he began, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made the rest of the world fade. "Before you walked into my life, this house was just a fortress. My life was a title, a heavy crown I was born to wear, a destiny of shadows and solitude. I thought that was all there was for a man like me. I built walls not just of stone, but around my heart." He paused, his gaze searching her face as if memorizing every detail. "That night in my office, when you stood in a storm of shattered glass and didn't flinch, you showed me a courage I had never known. And the night I came to you, broken and bleeding, trusting you with my life, you showed me a compassion that shattered my soul. You saw my pain," he whispered, his voice growing thick with an emotion so raw it brought tears to her eyes, "and you were not afraid. You saw my heart, the ugly, scarred, and broken truth of it, and you loved it. You loved it back to life." He released one of her hands and reached into the pocket of his tailored trousers. When he opened his palm, a ring lay nestled there, catching the sunlight. It was not a loud, ostentatious jewel, but a piece of art that spoke of elegant strength and timeless beauty. The band was crafted of woven platinum, like two souls forever entwined, and it held a single, deep emerald that seemed to hold the very essence of the garden, lush, alive, and precious. "This life I lead," he continued, his voice steady and sure, "it will always have its dangers. The shadows will always linger at the edges. But I don't want to face them alone anymore. I don't want you to be my secret, my hidden joy. I want you to be my light, my strength, my partner in everything. I want the whole world to know that you are the one who holds my heart. Stay with me. Be my wife, be my queen. Rule this life by my side. Give me your forever, Helen, and I will spend every single breath of my forever ensuring you never, for 1 second, regret that choice." Tears streamed freely down Helen's cheeks now, but they were tears of a joy so profound it felt like a supernova in her chest. She looked at him, this powerful, dangerous man brought to his knees not by an enemy, but by love, and she saw only her future. She saw the partner, the protector, the man who had trusted her with his deepest vulnerability. He was offering her not just a ring, but his entire world, his kingdom, and his heart, asking her to rule it all with him. Her answer was not a thought, but a truth that erupted from the very core of her being. Yes, she breathed, the word a soft, sure vow that hung in the fragrant air between them. A radiant, tear-streaked smile broke across her face, brighter than the sun above. Yes, Ernesto. My forever has been yours from the moment you trusted me with your pain. 1,000 times, yes. A smile, true, unburdened, and breathtaking in its joy, transformed his face. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. His hands were steady as he slid the cool, platinum band onto her finger, a perfect, permanent weight. When he leaned down to kiss her, it was different from all the kisses they had shared before. This was not a kiss of desperate passion or hidden desire. This was a kiss of promise. It was slow, deep, and filled with a breathtaking certainty. It was a seal on their vow, a silent, sacred celebration of the new life, the new world they were creating together, right there in the sunlight. Years later, the mansion remained a fortress, but its gates were now open to laughter and light. The emerald ring was a constant, beautiful presence on Helen's finger, a daily reminder of the love that had not only saved them but had built them anew. Ernesto's business dealings became more strategic, more diplomatic. He had a reason to build a legacy of peace, a powerful, unwavering reason to come home safely every night. The dangerous life was still a part of their reality, a wolf that sometimes howled in the distance, but it no longer ruled their hearts. Their love, which had sparked with a glance, flared in a storm of glass, and blazed into an inferno in a moment of tender healing, had become their unbreakable armor. They had found their forever not in the absence of storms, but in the unshakable peace and fierce devotion they built together within them. It was a forever built on trust forged in crisis, intimacy born from vulnerability, and a promise sealed in a secret garden. And it was a forever that was only just beginning. Did Ernesto and Helen's journey from a dangerous secret to a powerful, forever love capture your heart? If you believe in love that heals and transforms, subscribe to the channel for more passionate, heart-pounding romances. We treasure your thoughts. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what part of their story you loved the most.